Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we are looking at something a little different. We're taking a look at Game of Thrones, a revisit of Season 1. Before we get into it, I should say spoiler warning on the whole of Game of Thrones. We are going to be looking at this series, in particular Season 1, but we will talk about other series and how they compare and how parts of this series work in favour of the other episodes. Oh, how simple was it back then? All Ned had to deal with was his two daughters playing up. Arya had only dreams of becoming a knight, Sansa so still full of hope. But the opening scene is iconic. Whatever you thought of the finale, whatever you thought of the in-between, it comes full circle well, and the mirror in the end and finish of the series is something that I adore. This ranging party in particular sets up the series perfectly, creating the epic fantasy, the myth and legend of the White Walkers, but also the closeness, the comedy, the fighting, the character-driven series. It establishes themes of ice and fire early on, which are the core parts of Game of Thrones throughout. As they travel through Iceland, their torches ablaze to save them from the cold. Fire becomes less and less, and slowly towards the end of the season it becomes colder, and there's more and more White Walkers to overrun the humans. Within the first 5 minutes we're introduced to death and the overwhelming sense of dread. But nobody in the party seems to be sure of who did it or how it was done. This symbol appears for the first time, one that does at points hold a little more weight, but in general doesn't really add that much to the story. I think this is one of the points people felt a little hard done by in the end of the series. We don't really get enough answers for all the myth and legend that was created so early on. However, I do have to take my hat off to all three actors. They play their role well and truly accentuate their best and worst qualities in such a short sequence. We learn a lot about them. This in particular is a terrifying scene which immediately instills fear and mystery, which holds up for the rest of the series. We don't find out what these things are for a while, and that's one of the strongest themes and positives of the show. We then finally get into the heart of the show and some characters who are going to stick around as the deserter from the Night's Watch is met by Ned Stark's men. It's so bizarre now seeing all the Stark children, Ned himself, Caitlyn, just all of the North, so at calm and at peace, knowing what's to come for them. Again, the dialogue and actions are spot on in this first episode. You immediately get an idea of who each person is. And for that reason, we're going to take a bit of a deeper look in the first episode like we are now. And then as we get on further in the season, maybe a little less analysis and just sort of looking at the beats of the episodes and the stronger points. We will be doing this for every season. So if you are enjoying this, make sure you're subscribed, leave a like. And in the comments below, let me know your favourite part of Season 1. Everything in this season, and in Game of Thrones in particular, is absolutely steeped in lore. The sheer amount of backstory and small details alone is enough to fall in love with this series all over again, and what the latter series are severely lacking, forgetting the importance of subtlety. We then get one of the most interesting scenes of the show, foreshadowing of the death of King Robert, the stag at the hand of mountain lions, or the Lannisters in this case. The Stark children then receive a direwolf each, which will play a massive part for the characters, some more than others, and even more so in the books, but it's a great addition and in theme with the house. Now, as we move on in the episode, we find more and more out about Jon Arryn. The problem with this storyline for me is we never meet Jon Arryn. We don't really care for him. Obviously we stand with him because he's with the Starks and the Tullys and the side of right, but it's so clearly just a plot point to drive everything else. Although it is extremely interesting to see how it unravels, and at parts Game of Thrones does develop into a murder mystery type thing, which having these different aspects I think helps the show a lot.
Not all of them.
The cuts from character to character like this hold so much more weight, perfectly introducing the last Targaryen, or so they think. A fascinating character for 80 to 90% of the show, spoiled in the finale and the final season, making decisions that go against a whole show's worth of development. But let's not get into that. Let's try and stick to the story. We will get to that season eventually. So for now, let's just stay calm and enjoy Game of Thrones for what it is. The show is full of iconic quotes, especially the earlier series. The writing is just so tight.
Let me give you some advice, bastard. Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you.
It sums up situations perfectly, absolutely explaining a situation, the characters, their intentions, and foreshadowing massive events to come. At its height, nothing compares to this show for me. The first season and the first episode in particular is an absolute masterpiece, setting up 7 seasons or 8 seasons in total of believable characters and interesting storylines. We get the introduction of the possibility, at least, of dragons. I know a thing or two about dragon eggs. I have got a review of the ones I picked up. They're just out of shot, but they're up on top of the cabinet. So if you do want to check that out, there'll be a link in the description, or you can click on the side. But in particular, this scene has always interested me. I am curious if Ilario was aware there was a chance they could be dragons and was trying to fulfill a prophecy or help Daenerys out, or if it was truly just a gift that he never expected to happen. Ilario and Varys in particular were always very close, so it could be an interesting idea that they put this into motion. And we close out the huge reveal of the brother and sister love with the resolution of Bran being put on his path to become the Three-Eyed Raven. All round spot on episode, minus the brother-sister thing. Let's hop into episode 2, and we start with Game of Thrones flexing its other muscles with the amazing talents of Peter Dinklage and Jack Gleeson's comedy chops. It doesn't break immersion or even feel out of character or place. It's intertwined effortlessly. We get moments of Jamie Lannister's dry wit as well, just characters playing to their strengths. Again, the first season, and in particular the first few episodes, set up things we get payoff for as late as the final season. Let's say Jon doesn't give Arya a sword here, and then Ned doesn't get a lesson, she doesn't go on a journey of learning to fight, and she doesn't defeat the Night's King. The battle between the Starks and Lannisters escalates throughout the first season. The push, the assassin sent to finish the job, it slowly escalates more and more into one of the most unbelievable and defining scenes of the series and TV in general, with the beheading of Ned Stark. And why does all this happen? Who puts that in place? This sadistic bastard here. We are, of course, talking about Joffrey and how wild he is trying to kill Arya after she manages to avoid his swings. I like how well they develop the character. He's slowly revealed to be more and more despicable. This scene shows how truly cowardly he is, though, which kind of makes you hate him more. From the moment the Starks arrive into King's Landing, it's apparent their strengths aren't in political intrigue and playing the Game of Thrones. They have too much good and honour about them to play the games the likes of the Lannisters revel in. This becomes more and more apparent, and you always get the feel Ned Stark is going to be outfoxed, and he isn't able to escape in time. Now, into the third episode, we meet a lot of vital characters in this scene alone, some of the most intelligent characters in the whole show, all in one room. We get very subtle moments of brilliance from one of my favourite characters of the whole thing, Littlefinger, and his counterpart, Varys. Now and again, we get these smaller characters like Old Nan as well, who tell fascinating stories about the Winter and White Walkers. It makes it real for us, although they're believed to be gone, we know that's not the case. One thing the season does well is build up the tensions of the two houses, and you never know when a moment is going to break out into a fight or lead to a death. As the show goes on, we learn more and more about Varys and Littlefinger and their little birds and spies set up around the castle. As Littlefinger walks Ned through, the sheer amount of people watching you in King's Landing. It's clear it's not a place for Ned. Moments like this, though, are some of my favourite in Game of Thrones. Powerful moments, history-driven moments, in which they build the most fascinating characters we've seen on TV. Robert Baratheon, the Stag, a powerhouse, smashing through his enemies with a warhammer, steeped in achievements we want to know more about. Sir Barristan Selmy, one of the most famous and well-respected fighters in all of the land, even put on a pedestal by Jamie Lannister. But the other side characters in this episode, we do meet Syrio Forel, another character steeped in mystery. People do believe he was Jaqen H'ghar. From some of the things he says, he speaks of Arya not being a man or woman. She is no one. She is her blade. Theories have always been one of my favourite parts of the fanbase. There's so many interesting concepts and small details people can create whole stories about. As we move into the mid part of the series, the smartest part of Game of Thrones is J.R.R. Martin's writing. He knows exactly where every character is going and every beat along their journey. Bran has always been destined to be the three-eyed raven, and through clever writing it feels that way. Especially on a rewatch, these scenes make a lot more sense. But as well as the writing and clever characters, we have the opposite of that. We have the fighting and the Dothraki horde. Their fighting style is incredible. Khal Drogo is one of the coolest characters, but this story does waste a lot of time with them to start. They spend so many minutes in this episode in particular just riding around, talking, and nothing particularly interesting in comparison to the other storylines at the moment. It does, however, build up hatred for the equally despicable Viserys, leading to one of my favourite moments to come. So Game of Thrones has hit all of the notes so far. Family drama, comedy, epic, fantasy, horror. Why not add detective show? Ned Stark slowly begins to unravel the mystery of Jon Arryn's death. Unfortunately, it's leading to some dark places in King's Landing, but it is fascinating as we slowly find out the truth. It makes you want to come back every episode. And so we do for episode 5. One of my favourite characters of the first season, and he would be in general if he survived that long, is Robert Baratheon. And his give no shits attitude is one of my favourite parts of the first season. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see him in his prime cutting down armies, but his comedy, brutish nature, and hatred of everything Lannister is enough for me right now. On the flip side of the globe, we've got the capturing of Tyrion, which isn't one of the most interesting storylines, but we get plenty of Peter Dinklage, which is always a plus in my books. We also get the introduction of one of the show's better characters in Bronn, who we see in action later, how cutthroat he can be, not only with his sword, but with his words. My favourite character in this episode, Baratheon is cool, Khal Drogo is incredible, but it has to be Varys. Varys has always been mysterious, not just in this season, but the whole show alone, but scenes like this give us a slight insight to the character and his intentions. It would seem the Targaryens have always been his aim for the throne. He wants what's best, and with Robert losing his grip, Lannisters fighting Starks, Dany does seem a reasonable shout. But then we get this scene, where it's obvious Varys has shared the news of the Targaryen child, meaning he's edging his bets. At the same time, it throws things into disrispute in King's Landing, so he is creating chaos. We know the attempt on her life is put into place, so Varys can't be 100% with the Targaryens. It's an interesting insight into Varys' mind, which is a truly fascinating place. Viserys finally meets his end, the first instance we get of a major character being killed off. He was destined to be on the throne, the last Targaryen, despite us realising it'd be Dany early on. It's just such a satisfying death for a terrible character. It's no Joffrey, but it will do until we get there. Moving into episode 7, we get another one of those iconic scenes, which is one of my favourites from the whole of the series. Charles Dance is an incredible actor, and probably one of the most talented Game of Thrones has, which is why this is one of my favourite scenes. Tywin makes it clear he stands only for the Lannisters and not the crown. It's all about the name and reputation. He makes Jamie seem like a child in this scene, which is hard to do, but it's done well. The fact he's skinning a stag is the icing on the cake, foreshadowing again the downfall of Robert Baratheon. And after this scene is the start of the end. The start of the Lannisters, a fall of King's Landing and the people, the end of honour, Robert's rebellion, the Starks, and any justice in the realm. Ned being stripped of his role as the king after the demise of Robert Baratheon and thrown into a dungeon. As the season moves on, we realise we're not watching the fairy tale epic we thought we were as Littlefinger takes Ned at knife point. But it's not all bad, because from this we get the building of some truly incredible characters, and my favourite of the show, Robb Stark. The young wolf receives a calling to King's Landing, in which he decides to arrive with all the banners of the North. He outfoxes the Lannisters in every battle, which is unheard of at this point. He rallies the North and all the houses, and would have wrapped up the war comfortably. But again, this isn't a fairy tale. The one with strategy and power does not win. Knowledge is power. And again, the Lannisters are a few steps ahead. We get an incredible fight scene between Drogo and one of his men, But this also does lead into one of the weaker storylines in which Khal Drogo, the man, the myth, the legend, taken down by an infected scratch. At least before that, we see him tear out this guy's throat while screaming about power. It shows the ruthless aggression of the Dothraki and how the Khal himself is unbeaten in combat. We go from one side to another as we see the standoff between Robb Stark and Great Jon Umber. It's another case of great writing and dialogue. It shows the respect he is already gaining and the trust in his soldiers, something nobody in King's Landing could compare to. Equal to the moments of beating their chest and testosterone, we get these sweet moments between mother and son, where she's so proud of what Robb is doing. Although not as apparent as later seasons, Fire and Ice is still a strong theme and versus in the earlier season. We've got the darker, drearier, white and grey Stark scenes versus the Lannisters of fire, much hotter orange and red tones in their scenes. We talk about great characters, we've got to talk about the disgusting ones as well, and in this episode, episode 9, we meet Walder Frey. One that is pivotal to the Starks winning, and again, not one they show enough respect and pay enough attention to. They're not willing to play games and show respect where it's not deserved. Again, honour, love and good weighs too heavy on the Starks, and this time it will be Robb's head. It's a stark contrast, excuse the pun, where Jon Snow is truly finding himself and overcoming his hurdles. Robb is just arriving at his. The Night's Watch is a lot more black and white than King's Landing. You don't need to think about people watching you or battle of words. It's survival above everything else. Robb flexing his strategic muscles though is a highlight of the episode and season. Once he captures Jamie and outfoxes the Lannisters, he's offered a fight to end it all. In this scene he shows his maturity in not letting his anger take over. However, he does acknowledge the loss of his men and the war not ending. He's smart enough to celebrate, but realises there's still more to come and rallies his men. And of course, after being captured, the moment we've all been waiting for. Whether you've seen the series or not, you've probably heard of it. Ned Stark bowing to Joffrey and confessing him king. First time I saw this, I knew, he just had to do that and then he'd be set free. Things would work out for the Starks. They probably wouldn't be as high up or as respected, but it would work out. Well, no, I was wrong. Things flip and your stomach drops as you realise it's the end. This is one of the handful of moments I had to stop watching for a few days, and even rewatching it doesn't feel good. It's not what we're taught to know from storytelling and even life. Slowly, the Starks are told one by one about their father dying. The scene with Caitlyn crying in the woods to find Robb breaking down is hard to watch even now. Everything he was fighting for, he shows his vulnerability of being a boy again, threatening to kill them all. Game of Thrones has always been first and foremost about multi-layered characters, with fascinating motives and emotion that only a real character or person could have. It's what makes it so believable. The finale continues to show how despicable of a character Joffrey is. Now he has power and can do as he wishes, he's the most repulsive character on TV, and it only gets worse and worse. Jack Gleeson plays it perfectly. If we're going to talk about the bad, let's talk about the good and the great speeches from the likes of Great Jon Umber, delivering the most powerful speech of the show for me. It's Aragorn in Return of the King, it's William Wallace in Braveheart, the King in the North. Although the episode doesn't really stay upbeat, we see Pycelle doing things with Robert Knott, the death of Khal Drogo, and the loss of Targaryen unborns. I actually really dislike the witch storyline with Khal Drogo. I think anyone else could have dressed his wound and he wouldn't have died. I know he had to, but this was a terrible way of doing it, and it should have been in battle, or saving Daenerys, or something worthwhile. But obviously the episode is saved when we get this scene of Daenerys with her dragons, restoring any faith people had in the Targaryens and the myth of dragons growing up. But that's all we've got for season 1, so if you're enjoying this video, make sure you're subscribed. Again, let me know your favourite moment in the comments below, and until next time,